Leadership is at the heart of any group activity. Whether the team would succeed or fail, the task rests upon the hands of its leader. This is true whether in armed combat or in any business enterprise. In fact, businesses can learn a thing or two from U.S. military services when it comes to effective leadership. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin discusses the notable leadership concepts they have embraced as part of the Navy SEALs. They share their real experiences in the battlefield and relate how these military principles can help with any business. It comprehensively describes combat operations and trainings to help illustrate how effective leadership works. This book discusses 3 main points which are organized into 12 chapters. The first part discusses the building blocks necessary to help each reader develop a mindset of leading and winning. The second part teaches the laws of combat, which are the critical concepts in developing teamwork. These first 2 parts serve as the foundation of good leadership, while the third part deals with maintaining the team's exceptional performance. The authors of this book want us to understand that there are only 2 types of leaders, ineffective and effective leaders. Ineffective leaders are those who want to be recognized during victories, but put the blame on others when something bad happened. On the other hand, all effective leaders take full responsibility for everything that results from the actions of his teammates. They embrace and use extreme ownership. This is especially true from the military perspective. However, most people believe that the leadership concepts utilized by the military cannot be applied to running businesses. They often believe military leadership is composed of detailed plans devised by senior leaders and that those at the bottom of the ladder are simply ordered to obey them. That is not true at all. Although the military leaders are in charge of the planning, their junior leaders are also encouraged to provide input. They acknowledge that the leaders of the frontline teams have information which is necessary in order to create effective plans. Thus, without their effective communication to their subordinates, there can be no success. The Navy SEALs believe that effective leadership requires each team member, from their senior leaders, fire team leaders, squad leaders, and junior officers, to work hand in hand to guarantee the success of the mission. From this, we can now see that the SEALs' approach to leadership can easily be adopted and applied in the business world. Similar to the military, much of the company's decision-making lies with the top-level managers. They are responsible for effectively briefing the details of their recent command to their mid-range managers who, in turn, will inform their supervisors. These supervisors, on the other hand, are in charge of overseeing the employees. Each of these team members play a vital role towards achieving success. But what if the mid-level managers did not understand the instructions? Or what if an employee committed errors in the execution? Who would they blame? The only answer to this question is the leader. If the mid-level manager failed to comprehend the task, then the leader did not explain it properly. If an error in execution occurs, then the leader may not have trained the employee properly. However, this fact may be hard to accept. As leaders, we may feel that taking the blame after all the hard work may be a bit too much. But in order to become effective leaders, we must simply accept the fact. We must practice extreme ownership no matter what happens. Extreme ownership simply means taking responsibility for the results of all the team's actions. Whether the result is positive or negative, a good leader knows that he is responsible for it. This helps keep the team humbled during victories and motivated during failures. Taking ownership also develops the leader's strategizing skills and his effectiveness when managing his people. Perhaps the best part about cultivating extreme ownership is how it affects the team as a whole. When junior leaders see their seniors take responsibility for their errors, it helps him open his eyes to what possibly caused the error. It then allows him to take responsibility for his own team's mistakes. In turn, all subordinates will learn from this attitude and embrace it as a part of their system. They will then begin to take responsibility for their own actions. Thus, extreme ownership can be contagious. We can now see how extreme ownership can greatly benefit any organization of people. Whether the team is composed of just 3 members or of hundreds, extreme ownership is the key towards leading them towards victorious results. It is the glue that ignites the team. It is at the core of successful leadership. Winning the war within. Extreme ownership. When something goes wrong, the immediate reaction of most people would be to put the blame on someone else. We tend to create a list of excuses just so we can turn our backs on these failures. We simply cannot allow others to see that we are weak, that we are not perfect. Unfortunately, if we allow ourselves to keep making these excuses, we can never be effective leaders. You see, at the heart of leadership is extreme ownership. Extreme ownership means being truly and ultimately responsible for everything that happens during his guidance and control. This does not simply imply a responsibility for his own job. It means full ownership of all the factors involved, which eventually led to the outcome. There is no problem if it results in victory. Receiving praise for a job well done is music to the ears, after all. However, failure is a hard pill to swallow. More often than not, those failures are attributed to a teammate's inaccuracy, circumstances beyond our control, or that Lady Luck simply wasn't on our sides. We turn to a defensive mode in order to stay away from the blame. However, if we truly have our eyes fixed on victory, we have to set our egos aside. We must also understand that we as leaders are the only ones to blame for whatever happened. It requires us to accept what had happened and own up to our own failures. Doing so takes such humility and courage, which is why it deserves the highest form of recognition. After we have completely accepted that we are to blame, it is the only time when we can be said to be ready for extreme ownership. Once a leader has embraced extreme ownership, his eyes begin to open up to reality. He sees that, in fact, his subordinates cannot be blamed for whatever that happened. He begins to realize that each step his subordinates take is a result of his leadership. To illustrate, if a strategic mission did not go as planned, there may have been something wrong with how he explained it to his officers. If a team member is not performing well, then there must have been something wrong with how he trained them. Thus, these situations will eventually lead back to his own mistakes. Another aspect of leadership, which is attributable to extreme ownership, is how it helps him correct his erring ways. Relating to the previous illustrations, if the mission was not properly relayed, he should make sure that it is comprehensively understood by his subordinates. It requires an accurate and detailed explanation of each step, if he has to, in order to ensure proper execution. Additionally, owning up to the team's failures allows the leader to assess its weaknesses. Once these weaknesses are taken note of, it will be easier for the leader to come up with a more effective plan and an improved team. One of the best parts of extreme ownership is how it affects the entire team. When subordinates see how their leaders take full responsibility for what happened, he becomes a role model. His ownership will be contagious. If he takes ownership, then his junior leaders would tend to be more responsible for errors committed by the team. Eventually, the whole team will develop a culture of extreme ownership, which guarantees their efficiency and effectiveness. Instead of creating excuses, team members are now inspired to come up with ways to help fix the situation. To apply this in the business world, the authors share how the mindset of extreme ownership has helped a company vice president to get his people to listen, support, and properly execute his plans. They guided him towards admitting to the board of directors that he was to take complete responsibility for the problems going on in his department. After the vice president has set his ego and personal agenda aside, he was able to see what was wrong with the picture. This guided him to come up with a list of corrective measures so that there would no longer be problems with the execution. Although there were times he returned to being defensive, keeping his eyes on the goals quickly reverted him back to extreme ownership. No bad teams, only bad leaders. There's an old saying about there being no bad teams, only bad leaders. This statement couldn't be truer. To paint us a better picture, the authors share the story of a boat crew race among students. This race involved the SEAL instructor in providing complicated instructions to the boat crew leaders, who were also tasked with instructing their men to ensure proper execution. After a few rounds, one team consistently won each race, while another was consistently at the bottom. Even with the harsh remarks from the SEAL instructor, the losing team still didn't perform well. By that time, a senior officer suggested that the best and worst teams should switch leaders. Others doubted that this could ever make a difference, but as soon as the race began, they began to see a miraculous turnaround. The team which had been consistently underperforming is now leading the bunch thanks to their new leader. Nonetheless, the team which had been consistently leading the race is now in second place. As shocking as it may be, this is the reality of how effective leaders can lead a team towards victory. The example showed how new leadership can significantly improve how a team works despite its similar circumstances. Thus, a team might be underperforming because it had a leader who was underperforming. This, we can now see how important leadership is to any group. Success or failure all rests in the hands of its leader. He is the one who either drives the team to be motivated to execute their tasks or could lead the team to total destruction. Another important concept to understand with respect to leadership is to focus on what is right in front of them. They must only set their eyes on a feasible goal, which is already apparent at that moment, instead of worrying about what the future holds. This focus is necessary because exceptional performance can only result from teamwork towards the same focused goal. Effective leaders must also inspire their members to achieve a high standard of performance. They must understand that it does not end with setting high expectations. When an officer poorly performs and was not made accountable for it, that substandard performance then becomes the new standard. Thus, a good leader must set high standards and must not be afraid of implementing consequences in case of failure to meet these standards. However, it doesn't stop there. Once this high standard has been met, leaders must continuously push beyond them. In doing so, he must also encourage the team to cultivate and utilize extreme ownership to drive them towards working together. After all, leaders are not allowed to be satisfied, and their team is always expected to improve. When this happens, it is expected that a culture of extreme ownership has already been built into the team. They will continue to perform effectively even when their leader is temporarily taken out of the picture. This makes them ready for whatever life throws in their way. In the business world, it also requires a company to have the same extreme ownership mindset in order to thrive. There can be instances when certain officers of the company would be unwilling to embrace this mindset. They become unreceptive to the idea of improving the overall status of the business, simply because he could not allow his ego to be crushed. When this happens, it is incumbent upon the top-level management to make him understand that the changes are necessary to keep the business alive. However, there can be inevitable situations wherein a team member simply would not embrace this mindset, even if all the other members already have. This can cause the entire team to tumble, and the one who has to be responsible for the blame is the chief operating officer. In the end, it is up to the CEO to choose between keeping the company alive or to let the erring officer go. Believe. Another important concept that leaders must have a deep understanding of is the belief in the mission. There will be times when the command received from higher authorities will seem like it doesn't make sense at all. It would seem like a waste of time or resources, so it would be difficult to grasp the wisdom behind it. This situation is especially true in the military, where the mission's execution is so critical that one false move can easily lead to death. When they are faced with a mission which is so difficult to have faith in, the authors share that they should take the time to internalize the command. They will start to think of the command from a strategic level. Once they have taken a step back to adjust their perspective, things will start to fall into place. They will see that there is a greater cause far beyond his personal motives. If he cannot see this greater good, then he can never be a true believer of the mission. He can never be an effective leader. Only when we become true believers can we have the power to convince others to execute a mission correctly. He must be his team's source of inspiration during these tough times. In fact, he must serve as the perfect example to his team with both his obedience and belief in his command. Of course, it will inevitably be faced with criticism. Much like how you found it impossible for the mission to prosper, your teammates will definitely feel the same hesitation you once had. It then becomes your responsibility to make sure that everyone believes in the mission. In order to do so, the leader must properly brief his teammates about the mission. There is a need for him to impart a general understanding of the why of the command, and not just concern himself with the what. He must be able to align these goals at a certain level. Otherwise, members will not be able to perform their tasks harmoniously. It is also important to note that this responsibility does not end with the senior leaders. Junior leaders also carry the same responsibility to make the instructions clear to his subordinates. Once they have developed a brief in the mission as a team, they can effectively work in a synchronized manner towards success. Their actions and words would reflect confidence and self-assuredness, which would not be possible if they are consumed by doubt. Much of this belief is also needed in businesses. There can be times when the chief executive officer would give an instruction to his senior managers, which, unfortunately, the latter could not fully comprehend. However, instead of asking for clarification, they fear that they would look silly in front of the CEO. Unknown to them, this attitude will not lead to anything beneficial to them or to the company. In fact, it may even lead to the company's downfall. Although the senior managers did not immediately see the logic behind the initial instruction, it is still incumbent upon the CEO to properly orient them. He must provide detailed guidelines on how their long-term goals can be sustained by this new plan. He must make his teammates realize that there are things far greater than their own: the company itself, its services, and the employment of people who are dependent upon the company. More importantly, a good leader must show that he is an approachable person. He must fully comprehend the weight of his position and how people could possibly see him, a highly revered individual. Nonetheless, he must be able to show his comrades that he is willing to listen to their concerns without judging their competence in the job. With this, we can now see why believing in the mission is critical to the success of the mission. Whether in the military or in the business industry, it helps us focus on winning, develop extreme ownership, and inspire teamwork. Check the ego. One of the biggest challenges towards taking responsibility, an essential component of extreme ownership, is our ego. Since ego is often referred to as an individual's sense of self-esteem, it is undeniable that all of us have our respective egos. It is responsible for our drive to succeed in every goal we set our eyes on. However, the way we see ourselves sometimes creates an illusion that we are not allowed to make mistakes. It makes us believe that we are perfect human beings, completely incapable of experiencing failure. When our ego spirals out of control, it can greatly disrupt how we live our lives, more specifically, how we lead. Ego clouds are responsible for disrupting how we take advice or constructive criticism. It makes it completely difficult for us to embrace our mistakes and own up to them. However, we must always keep in mind that cultivating extreme ownership requires us to check our egos from time to time. When we do so, we also cultivate humility. It allows us to admit our mistakes, take ownership for them, and come up with a plan to overcome them. Nonetheless, when we regularly check our ego, it can be our best assessor. It can provide us with an honest evaluation of our performance, what our strong points are, and how we can improve overall. It will make us confident, yet humble, enough to not be cocky. Thus, we must not allow our egos to control us. Instead, we should be the ones to control our egos. To illustrate how this concept works in the business sphere, the authors share their experience in providing leadership advice to a mid-level manager who had troubles confronting his subordinate. The issue began when the drilling superintendent made a decision without consulting his boss. From the drilling superintendent's point of view, he was more experienced than the mid-level manager, so he was confident about the decision he made. On the other hand, not only did it violate the company's standard operating procedures, but it cost the company so much capital. Unfortunately, the mid-level manager wasn't comfortable with the idea of confronting his subordinate because he was intimidated by the latter's experience in the industry. When we dissect their egos, we can see that the manager's ego was offended when his subordinate did not consult him before coming up with his decision. The drilling superintendent's ego, on the other hand, was bruised by the fact that he has more years of experience than his boss, and yet he was made to follow his boss. However, we must keep in mind that dealing with our teammates' egos is an essential component of leadership. But in order to do so, we must first work on our own ego. The authors reiterate the importance of extreme ownership in cultivating this control. With extreme ownership, we can freely admit that we are to blame for everything that has happened. It helps us acknowledge that being in charge of the whole operations, we are also at fault for the fact that others did not follow our instructions. The authors share that approaching the problem by putting blame on others only results in the clash of egos. And from what we all know, clashing egos can lead to disastrous results. In contrast, when we approach the problem with controlled egos and acceptance of the blame, the teammate will begin to see the problem past the ego clouds. This results in effective communication of the standard operating procedures and other instructions. When we learn to control our egos, we begin to see the bigger picture. We realize that we are working towards a goal bigger than ourselves. It's not about who the boss is or who has the most experience. Instead, it's all about the goal and the best way to conquer it. Laws of combat. Cover and move. The second part of the book discusses the laws of combat and how they can effectively be used in the business world. The first law, which is also the most fundamental tactic, is to cover and move. Otherwise referred to as teamwork, this law encourages the unity of all the elements of the team in working together towards a common goal. This tactic teaches us that all teams must learn to depend on each other. You see, if an individual decides to move on his own, completely independent of the plan, it may lead the team towards catastrophic circumstances. Understanding this tactic also helps in assigning tasks within subdivisions of a certain team. Each division is responsible for its own assignments. This helps each member of the division to focus on their assignment while still making sure to keep the bigger picture in mind. However, when divisions become too focused on their own tasks, tension may arise. They begin to lose sight of the fact that they are to work together as a team and towards the same objective. They see the other divisions as competitors instead of allies. When this happens, the responsibility falls on the leader to make sure that their eyes remain fixated on the strategic mission. As the leader, he must understand that each team member is critical to the success of the mission. If it fails, everyone fails. If they succeed, everyone played a part towards it. Thus, each member of the team must learn to cover and move, to work together, and to provide support to each other. This is a fundamental requisite in achieving victory. To apply this law of combat in the business world, the authors share the story of their client who was a production manager of a certain company. This production manager encountered problems with a transport company, which they used to ship their products. Both companies are owned by the same parent corporation. Due to their issues, his team had problems with minimizing the downtime of their production, since this cost the company a great amount of money. Instead of owning up to his mistakes, the production manager blamed the transport company. By using cover and move, the authors advised that being owned by the same corporation meant that both companies have the same mission. Thus, instead of arguing with the other company, they must work together to achieve the common goal. They must see the bigger picture that the real enemy are the competing corporations and not each other. In order to do this, it is essential to build a personal relationship with the transport company. The production manager is advised to clearly explain what his company needs from them and why he needs them. He must also ask the transport company if there is anything his company can do to help. Thus, the secret towards working together to win is to communicate well and establish a better working relationship. This helps leaders to understand the various problems and challenges faced by the other team, which has resulted in the delays. It provides an avenue for both teams to work together in order to properly manage their limited resources and manpower. Once this happens, the different teams will begin to see each other from a different perspective. They are no longer competing teams, but teams who work together to achieve the same overall mission. This is how Cover and Move works to improve teamwork. Simple. Combat, much like our own lives, are filled with complexities. Some are results of our own choices, while some are those beyond our control. Unfortunately, when we allow ourselves to drown in these complexities, we will find it hard to focus on our goals. Complicated situations always lead us to confusion, so we often have a hard time understanding them. Thus, the ability to simplify tasks and instructions is an important characteristic in every leader. Everyone involved in the mission has every right to understand his role and how it can contribute to achieving victory. In order to do so, we must communicate our plans and orders in a simple, concise, and clear manner. We as leaders must also be patient and understanding throughout our endeavors. Fortunately, this principle is not only limited to combats fought by the military or the SEALs, but also promises great success when applied against the many battles we face in business or in life. As discussed, providing clear instructions is critical for the proper execution of tasks. It is incumbent upon business leaders to make sure that they clearly explain everything to their subordinates. If the mid-level managers do not understand what the mission is all about, there would be a tendency for his teammates to be in a state of confusion. They wouldn't know which tasks should be prioritized over others. They are clueless as to which ones require a higher degree of care and focus. Leaders must then understand that people have different levels of comprehension. What may be simple to him may be seen as complex by others. This is the reason why leaders must be able to simplify his instructions to make his teammates completely understand the why of their mission. He must explain the basic concepts and point out the tasks which are vital to the success of the job. A good leader must not assume that all his junior leaders have automatically understood the concept after the first briefing. He should ask them for any questions or clarifications to ascertain how well they were able to comprehend the assignment. More importantly, he should make sure that each of his members have full belief and trust in the purpose of the mission. Thus, it also helps for a leader to remain approachable. When his subordinates are too intimidated by his position as the boss, they may pretend to have understood every bit of the instructions, even when they are completely lost in translation. They fear that their constant clarifications and questioning would anger their boss, which would result in the loss of their jobs. But of course, this doesn't mean that the boss should be too friendly with his colleague that the latter would forget who he is. To conclude this chapter, the authors share that although complex technology advancements is a sign of improvement, it is not always the case when it comes to leadership. Effective leaders are those who can successfully drive their teams toward winning through powerful communication skills. In fact, the best leaders are those who can fully translate complex commands into simple instructions, simple enough for all his teammates to understand. This helps them see the common end goal, and it keeps them focused towards achieving it. Prioritize and execute. Prioritize and execute is the third law of combat. This means that leaders must effectively learn and take the time to observe the surroundings prior to making a call. This is especially true in combat when we are completely surrounded by stressful circumstances. As counterintuitive as it may seem with the problem ahead, this law encourages us to remain calm in order to make the best decisions. In combat, this means being exposed to various problems and high-pressure environments, coupled with the immediacy of life and death. In the world of business, this means that careers and livelihoods may be at stake if a wrong move occurs. But regardless of these circumstances, leaders are still expected to render decisions almost instantly. To overcome the pressure, the author shares that an effective means to prioritize and execute is to make sure that the team is always ahead of the problem. This means coming up with a thorough and carefully strategized contingency plan. An effective contingency plan can easily lead the team towards victory even when untoward incidents occur. It keeps them ahead of the curve to avoid the stressful pressure that comes when the first plan backfires. Of course, it is necessary that the whole team is briefed on this contingency plan so that they can still harmoniously work together despite their troubles. This also makes the team ready to execute even when there are no instructions from their leader. Maintaining the strategic picture also helps the leader correctly prioritize for the team. It develops a perspective which easily helps him to be highly critical of the situation and opens his eyes to problems which require immediate attention. It must also be noted that priorities easily change in combat. Thus, it is incumbent for teams to try to avoid absolute fixation on a single issue. The leader is expected to relay these changes, while the teammates are expected to have developed a skill to reprioritize their efforts and adapt to the situation on the battlefield. To make it easier for the readers to implement this law of combat, the authors enumerate the following duties of an effective leader. 1. He must evaluate the problem with the highest priority. 2. He must simply, clearly, and concisely lay out the highest priority effort to his team. 3. He is responsible for developing and determining a solution. In doing so, it is suggested for the leader to seek input from junior leaders and the rest of the team. 4. He must direct the execution of such solution without losing focus of the priority task. 5. Move on to the next highest priority problem and repeat steps 1 through 4. 6. When priorities shift within the team, key information must be sent to all team members from the highest to the lowest ranks. 7. Target fixation must be avoided. Effective leaders keep their eyes open to see other problems to help them shift rapidly or as needed. To illustrate how this law is applied in the business world, the authors share how this has helped a chief executive officer save a company which was already losing a lot of money. This company has various initiatives, and all its teams were working on them at equal levels of priority. This, in effect, caused the company to use much of its resources and manpower, and no matter how hard each employee works, the company continued to lose money. The authors then advised the CEO to think of the task which requires the highest level of attention. The CEO easily identified it as the management of the sales force. True enough, if the company was losing money, then there surely is a need to drive up its sales. This thought helped the CEO to realize that not as much attention was given to their frontline salespeople to ensure that they were doing their best at their jobs. This led the CEO to spend several months to focus the efforts of the entire company towards providing support for the frontline salespeople. Each division focused on different tasks, but each task led to the same goal, to promote sales. Soon enough, the company regained their footing and was starting to realize a profit. Thus, success requires the different teams to focus all their attention and efforts towards a single initiative. It requires working on the job which has the highest priority. Through this, we can easily see the progress made as compared to working on different tasks. Once this assignment has been completed, then that is the right time to move on to the next one. Decentralized Command. Leadership means effective management of the team. That is not a problem if the team merely consists of about 10 people. But when we're talking about managing hundreds of men, like the SEAL senior leaders, that can be problematic. Instead of management, it can probably lead to the team's collapse, especially during the time of unexpected emergencies. This is when the fourth law of combat, or decentralized command, comes into the picture. Decentralized command teaches us that when teams are composed of an unmanageable number of people, then each team must be broken down into manageable subdivisions with a clearly designed leader. These designated leaders are then made to fully understand the overall mission and its respective goal. These designated leaders are encouraged to make decisions to ensure proper execution and accomplishment of the mission. These leaders also have clearly delineated responsibilities, and their teams are so organized for maximum effectiveness. More importantly, they must be able to understand the why of the mission so that they have full belief in the mission. It must be noted, however, that decentralized command does not mean that these subdivisions are independent enough to operate programs which are not in harmony with the mission. Junior leaders must understand that their authority has limits and that they are required to regularly communicate with their senior leaders. If a task seems to be outside their authority, they may only raise it to their senior leaders so that the latter can come up with an informed strategic decision. In line with developing decentralized command, junior leaders are also expected to develop their confidence. This confidence results from cultivating trust towards their senior leaders and towards the mission. At the same time, senior leaders must constantly communicate with their juniors for situational awareness. This keeps them informed of what is currently happening on the front lines so that they can come up with the necessary strategies. Proper positioning is also a necessary component of decentralized command. The authors share that positioning is important for a leader because it helps them keep the right amount of involvement in the action. They teach us that the best position is somewhere in the middle, not too involved in every detail of what's going on in the front lines, but not too far back to completely lose sight of the necessary details. Nonetheless, leaders must understand that they are never supposed to be stuck in one position. They have freedom of movement, especially when the necessities of the situation dictates. This law makes sure that each team supports the overall mission. Otherwise, this will result in chaotic situations because some leaders would want to take on too much of the action. It also makes sure that senior leaders are never disconnected from their teams on the battlefield. Thus, we can now see that decentralized command is a critical component to successful leadership. It is greatly applicable to any team in various industries and not just limited to military exercises. In the field of business, keeping an organizational chart is a common practice, and rightly so. It makes sure that all the tasks are properly spread out through the company's various divisions and subdivisions. This makes it easier for them to focus their attention on the ones which are directly related to their positions. It also helps them develop the skills necessary for each of their tasks. Nonetheless, there can be instances when a department leader is in charge of a bigger group of people than other departments. When this happens, a common observation is that the bigger group has a slower growth rate than smaller groups. This is due to the fact that bigger groups are harder to manage. The leader then develops a tendency to focus his attention and train his best performers only, while the others are often left at a mediocre pace. However, this should not be the case. A sign of good leadership is how he inspires each and every one of the subordinates to become the best. In order to ensure efficiency in both leadership and task fulfillment, it is necessary to create branches out of these divisions and have a branch leader clearly designated. This ensures that the work is equally divided among the different branches while also avoiding micromanagement. This is at the heart of decentralized command. Effective leaders understand that as human beings, we all have limitations. However, these limitations should never be seen as a roadblock to becoming good leaders. Instead, we should learn how to embrace these limitations and devise means to divide the work among our team members. Sustaining victory. Plan. Now that we have a deeper understanding of leadership, it is also important to discuss how to maintain this attitude toward success. The third part of this book teaches us about all the secrets in order to sustain victory. In every mission, planning is always the first step. It keeps us ready, properly strategized, and always steps ahead of the enemy. Leaders are expected to analyze the mission and provide clear directives to his teammates. He must be able to fully explain the mission in a way that the troops understand the deeper purpose behind it and how important it is to achieve the desired result. When the mission is fully ingrained in each fighter, it effectively guides each of them towards the proper execution of the plan. Another important step of the planning process requires the senior leaders to explore the various courses of action towards completing the mission. He must be able to strategically foresee the possible movements, a move which is necessary to ensure success. It also requires detailed information gathering because this data is critical towards the development of a thorough plan. Once there is a detailed plan, the next step is to delegate to subordinate leaders. All the junior leaders must have ownership over their tasks to ensure team participation. This step is critical towards developing innovation solutions to their problems. It also makes the frontline troops understand and believe in their mission and guarantees their effective execution of the plan. Leaders must also make sure that they are able to maintain a perspective which is above the micro-terrain of the plan. This is to ensure that there is compliance with strategic objectives of the plan and reduce the chances of being too caught up in details. This step is also necessary to determine if there are loopholes in the plan so that they can fill them in prior to sending out the troops. At this point, the entire team is now ready to be briefed with the mission. Effective leaders must be able to present the information clearly and concisely while making sure that each participant understands which tasks need priority. During the briefing, all participants are encouraged to ask questions and clarifications about the plan. Leaders must make themselves approachable, otherwise the frontline troops might be too intimidated to ask the most important questions. Aside from helping each member understand the mission from a strategic point of view, the plan also mitigates the possibility of risks where possible. SEALs know that there have been serious business in their hands, so identified risks are always calculated carefully. The plan is expected to enable the highest chance of success while serving as a tool to help leaders focus on risks that can be controlled. The authors share the following checklist to help guide readers towards proper planning. Analysis of this mission. Analysis helps leaders understand the mission, commander's intent, and end goal. Identification of personnel, assets, resources, and available time. Decentralization of the process. This stage empowers leaders within teams to determine the possible courses of action. Determination of the course of action. This stage aims to determine the simplest course of action and to help them focus on which is the best. Empowering leaders to develop the plan for the course of action. Planning for contingencies. Mitigation of controlled risks. Delegation of the plan. The junior leaders are informed of the plan to help the senior leaders take a step back from the planning. Checking and questioning the plan. The plan is checked against new information to make sure if it is still the appropriate solution for the situation. Briefing of the plan to all members. Post-operational debriefing. This final step requires an analysis of the various lessons learned and how these lessons can be implemented in future planning. Planning is not something new to people in the business world, and they are given absolute freedom in conducting their own planning process. Nonetheless, it is advised that these planning processes are to be standardized in a way that all the departments of the company may use the same format. In fact, it would also work to the company's advantage if their subsidiaries or service contractors would also adopt this process and terminology. When a company adopts a uniform planning process, the boss becomes confident that all his departments are working towards achieving the same end. He is ensured that all his employees will perform with their best efforts, which in turn also creates a better chance at accomplishing the mission successfully. From the perspective of those on the front lines, they develop their decision-making skills. They learn how to perform their jobs without having to ask questions at every turn. Thus, proper planning not only saves time, but it also prevents our energy and resources from going to waste. Leading up and down the chain of command. Like what previously was mentioned about leaders being able to move their positions, it is also important for leaders to lead up and down the chain of command. From everything which has been discussed so far, it is now clear that a major characteristic a good leader should have is his ability to communicate. Not only does this help with briefing the team of the plan, but it also helps in leading up and down the chain of command. Leading up the chain of command teaches us that the lower level leaders must learn to convey the critical information they have in the front lines in order to help their senior leaders in making strategic decisions. Otherwise stated, junior leaders must push situational awareness up the ladder. Leading up the chain requires that the subordinate leader must possess and use his influence, experience, knowledge, communication in order to relay the information while making sure that he is able to maintain the highest level of professionalism. He must also be humble enough to see the bigger picture that his boss also deals with other problems and has the responsibility to allocate the team's limited assets. Nonetheless, the junior leader's most important job is to support his senior's decision. Unity is critical to any team activity, so it is important to show respect towards the decision. On the other hand, leading down the chain of command means that an effective senior leader must routinely communicate with his team members. It encourages the senior leader to regularly conduct face-to-face conversations with his subordinates, to deal with direct reports, and to observe the frontline troops in action. This allows him to provide the teammates with a better understanding of their role in the mission, which, in turn, helps the troops prioritize their efforts toward the end goal. It also helps the senior leader to see what is going on at the tactical level. The authors also share that the major factors necessary for leaders to be aware of when leading up or down the chain of command. The first is to take responsibility for leading everyone, whether he may be at the top of the ranks or as a supervisor. Second, if a team member is not doing what is planned, the leader should determine what he can do to make the others do so. And finally, one must not ask his leader what he should do, but instead he should tell his leader what he is going to do. The twin concepts of leading up and down the chain of command are easily some of the most important military concepts which can be adopted into the business world. Aside from making every team member open their eyes to the reality that they are all facing the same problems, it also develops effective communication among the various departments within a team. With the concept of leading down the chain of command, CEOs and other top-level management leaders should take some time away from the office to observe what is happening on the front lines. They must make their subordinates feel that they are willing to listen to all of their work-related problems and concerns and suggest what they can do to overcome their problems. It is important that they make their employees believe that they are truly concerned with the upkeep of the company and that they are to be trusted with their positions. On the other hand, the concept of leading up the chain of command encourages the lower-level officials to be courageous enough to air their sentiment to their boss. They must understand that those at the higher ranks are not always aware of the problems at the front lines, so he must raise these issues from time to time. He must also be made aware that this new information can help their boss come up with updated plans to ensure accomplishment of the task. Nonetheless, he must maintain a respectful attitude and understand that the boss has other concerns. He must not be too demanding. To conclude, this chapter is all about developing the team's internal communication system. Once a team is made aware of whatever is happening on its different levels, it becomes more understanding of the situation. They readily and quickly adjust to the changing situation while still maintaining their focus on winning. Decisiveness and uncertainty. Given the high-pressure situation that leaders are under, a good leader must learn how to be comfortable with it. He must understand that a big portion of his job deals with uncertainty, and it is up to him to prepare his troops for what is yet to come. He must also be able to make comprehensive decisions and act decisively despite the chaos. This concept of dealing with uncertainty is often referred to as the incomplete picture principle. It states that we must remember that there is no 100% solution when we are dealing with situations with uncertain outcomes. Thus, leaders must have the ability to make prompt decisions which can be quickly adjusted to adapt to the changing situation. When we worry too much about trying to get all the necessary details to paint the perfect picture, it can only lead to disorder. Not only can it turn into a waste of time, but it can also cause some leaders to be paralyzed by their fear of the unknown. It keeps them from making strategic decisions and may possibly lead those on the front lines to dangerous situations. It leads to an inability to execute. Thus, we must always remember that success is never guaranteed, nor are outcomes always certain. Being comfortable in making decisions under stressful and uncertain circumstances is an important characteristic to develop. Whether as still senior leaders or as a simple citizen who wishes to make the right decisions in his life. This is especially true for those who are on top of the corporate ladder. The shifts in the market, more so with the laws of supply and demand, will always be a nightmare for CEOs. Specifically, if the market shifts against the services they offer, it would undoubtedly lead to their loss. However, these uncertain shifts should never pose as a problem. To good leaders, this simply stands as a challenge which can be easily overcome. It is a chance to prove one's leadership skills by safely navigating through the tides of doubt and hesitation. They must always be ready to face these tasks head-on, otherwise they will be stuck in the same position, dragging the company down with them. As earlier explained, it is important for a good leader to stay calm even when bombarded with troubling situations. This develops his quick thinking and strategic skills. More importantly, this develops a leader's most significant quality, his decision-making. If there is anything that indecisiveness leads to, it's definitely trouble. In the military, when a commanding officer is indecisive, it can cost the lives of his team. Or worse, it may even cost the lives of innocent people. With businesses, indecisiveness may cost the company a fortune, if not its complete collapse. With these in mind, we can now see why leadership goes hand in hand with decisiveness. Discipline equals freedom, the dichotomy of leadership. The final chapter of this book teaches us about the dichotomy of leadership. This teaches us that leaders must be able to create a balance in between seemingly contradictory qualities. To help us understand this concept better, the authors enumerate that a good leader is someone who must have the ability to lead, but also ready to follow. Be aggressive, but not overbearing. Be calm, but not robotic. Be confident, but never cocky. Be brave, but not foolhardy. Have a competitive spirit, but must also be gracious losers. Have an eye for details, but not allow themselves to be obsessed with them. Be physically strong, but also have mental endurance. Be humble, but not passive. Be quiet, but not silent. Be close with his subordinates, but not too close to still let them feel that he is in charge. Be able to execute extreme ownership. Among all these, the authors also point out that a good leader has nothing to prove, yet also has everything to prove. As confusing as it may seem at first, it simply means that the leader must not gloat about his position, but he must show that his teammates can trust and have confidence in him. This respect is earned through making sure that the team is taken care of and to make them feel that he is looking out for the team's long-term interest and well-being. Of course, this dichotomy of leadership also has an important use for business leaders. Not everyone can manage to do this balancing act with ease, and that's exactly what sets good leaders apart. Effective leadership plays an important role in achieving success. It means being responsible for clearly communicating the mission and goals to the rest of the team, for ensuring the proper organizational flow, and for developing strategic plans. A good leader is also expected to come up with the right decisions, even when he is under the extreme amount of pressure. Most importantly, a good leader knows that he should take full ownership of the team. He must not only join them in celebrating victories, but he must also stand by his team and acknowledge mistakes during the bad times. This means that he understands that he is responsible for every move made by his comrades. He knows that if fault or failure has resulted from the execution, it is attributable to his own faults and failures. He must also understand that only he is responsible for learning from and fixing these errors, developing a stronger team, and ultimately guide them toward success. This is extreme ownership. Although this concept has originated with the Navy SEALs, it is also applicable to our day-to-day lives. Specifically, it can be adopted wherever teamwork and leadership are necessary. The highly critical environment that SEALs often work with help them develop quick thinking, strategic decision-making, and helps them devise plans to ensure proper enforcement and execution. This same stressful environment is somewhat similar to those in the corporate world, and the same skills are necessary to help leaders in keeping the business alive. In order to develop extreme ownership, leaders must begin with internalizing and understanding the age-old concept that there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. When they open their minds to this concept, they begin to realize that how the members work together is a result of his leadership. Leaders must also learn to have complete belief and confidence in the mission. Otherwise, they can never correctly lead their team toward victory. And finally, effective leaders must learn how to control their egos. With these factors in mind, the author also discussed the various laws of combat which are necessary to help guide us through difficult situations. Cover and move is the first law, which simply means that all members should work harmoniously as a team in order to achieve success. The second law encourages leaders to keep their instructions in simple, clear, and concise terms. Prioritize and execute. The third law teaches us of the importance of focusing on the highest priority task first prior to moving on to the next task. And finally, the last teaches us that decentralized command is necessary in order for the team to effectively work together. With all these in mind, the author also stresses that it is important to sustain victory because it keeps us motivated and focused on winning. In order to do so, it requires us to plan, lead up and down the chain of command, be comfortable with decisive despite the uncertainty, and to create a balance between the different extremes of our character. With all these in mind, we can now see why the Navy SEALs make great leaders. They have embraced the concept of extreme ownership in a way that is so ingrained into their system. It has led them to numerous victories, yet helped them stay humble and accept their failures. It is also easy to see the similarities between the battlefield and the battles fought in the business world. Thus, good teams result from good leaders, and good leaders are those who practice extreme ownership.